The morning I found my first garden in this country stripped to the ribs, I did not curse. I did not throw the plants away. I stood with my coffee cooling in my hand, and I looked at the lacework that had been my Napa cabbage, and I heard my grandfather's voice from the village. He said gently as he always did, "Why did you let them in? Not how will you kill them now? Why did you let them in?" I had no answer. That silence taught me more than any bottle ever could. I went inside and I told my wife, "Tomorrow I will build a roof of air." I want to tell you the one thing I have done since that day, one simple thing, that has taken nearly all the pest worry from my garden. It is not a spray. It costs almost nothing. You may have seen it before and not understood why it matters. I will show you, but first you must know why it works, because the knowing is the real gift. The doing is just the hand following the heart. By the end, you will have a way to protect your plants that will make your heart rest easy. My name is Michael. I was born in a small farming village in Japan, where the land was shaped by hands, and the old people taught me things not written in books. The village sat between low mountains, and the air always smelled faintly of cedar and wet rice straw. My grandfather would walk the rows of daikon and cabbage, and he would hum to the seedlings. He said a garden is a promise to the next season, and a broken promise is a shame that carries through the winter. When I came to this country as a young man, I fell in love with the wide fields and the bright hope of America. I still love it. I say this gently, as a guest in your country, but I see things here that make my heart ache. So much is thrown away. So much effort is given to the soil, and then let go. There is a word in Japanese, matenai. It means the regret of wasting something still full of use. It is the sigh when you see a bruised persimmon left on the ground, or a tool left in the rain, or a perfect cabbage leaf riddled with holes because no one thought to cover it. I feel matenai when I see a gardener work for weeks, then watch the cabbage worm take every leaf. That is the waste of hope itself. I want to tell you how my grandfather would have stopped it, and how I stop it now, in my little garden here with my wife, where the seasons still speak. Tell me in the comments where you live and what you grow. I read every one. I like to imagine all the gardens out there, from small balconies to wide yards, each one a little voice calling across the fences. Before we go on, what I am showing you today is one method. There are more than 390 others. All my life, the old people who raised me lived by one word, matenai, and they had a clever, simple way for nearly everything: the garden, the pests, the pantry, the cleaning, the repairs, the home remedies, staying warm through winter. I gathered them all into one place, the Home Savings Almanac, 12 books anyone can follow. Watching this video will not change your home. Doing these things will. If you are in earnest, you want the whole library. It is discounted now, but the price climbs again soon. The link is below and in the first pinned comment. It costs less than a single dinner out, and it pays for itself by your next bill. Do not wait. You can begin today. Now let us continue. Most folks, when the pests come, think of war. They reach for a spray, a dust, a poison, something to kill. I understand. I did the same my first years. I would mix soap and oil. I would buy bottles of neem. I would go out at night with a flashlight and pick slugs by hand, and still the holes appeared. Still the seedlings vanished overnight. I remember one July, I had planted a whole row of beautiful bok choy, and by the third week nothing remained but pale green skeletons. I felt a deep tiredness, a sadness that went beyond the lost vegetables. It was the feeling of fighting the wind. But the old thinking is different. The old thinking says, do not fight the pest. Remove the invitation. A pest comes because you have set the table and left the door open. So you close the door. That is the one trick. A simple, fine covering over your plants. A barrier so light the air and light pass through, but the moth and the beetle and the bird cannot. When you understand this, you realize you are not fighting pests at all. You are growing inside a breathable veil, and the pests are outside, living their own lives, never touching your work. It sounds too simple. I will not pretend it is magic. It is just a law of nature done by hand. Ask me how I know. I have done it for many years now, and the university folks later confirmed what the old farmers knew. Physical exclusion is the first and best defense. I will break it down for you, the way I do it. step by little step. Number 1. Begin with young plants. The most fragile time is the beginning. A seedling has all its hope in a few small leaves, each one a tender green flag, a single moth landing, a single egg laid, and the caterpillar hatches hungry. So I cover my beds the same day I transplant. I use a fine mesh, a netting that you can see through like a wedding veil. Its threads are so thin that from a few steps away the whole bed looks misty, as if a low cloud has settled there. I lay it over hoops made from flexible pipe or bent wood. The hoops are not fancy. I use half-inch PVC pipe cut to length and simply pushed into the soil so they arc a foot or two above the bed. The hoops keep the cloth from resting on the leaves, so the plants can stand tall and breathe without the fabric rasping against their cuticles. I tuck the edges under stones or bury them in the soil a little, all the way around, pressing the soil down with my thumbs so no beetle crawls beneath. I check the corners 3 times, because a gap the thickness of a pencil is a highway for a cabbage moth. My grandfather used old fishing nets woven tight from the sea, nets that smelled of salt and had tiny cork floats still tied to them. What I use today is lighter, woven from synthetics, but the idea is the same. You give your garden a breathable skin, and when I do this, I feel something settle in my chest. I know that tonight, when I sleep, my seedlings are safe. No cutworm will curl around the stem. No flea beetle will pepper the eggplant leaves with holes like a paper lantern after a typhoon. The covering is a promise kept. I want to give you a small, honest caution here. Not all mesh is the same. Some netting has holes big enough for the tiniest pests, like the whitefly or a young flea beetle. You must look for a mesh with a hole size of about 1 millimeter or less, often sold as insect netting or enviromesh. If you hold it up to the light, you should see a very fine square grid, not a loose weave. The right mesh will let rain and light through without trouble, but it will stop even the smallest winged thieves. If you use a wider weave, you may still get damage, and you might blame the method when it was the material. The seed catalogs call this row cover with a specific grade. I will not mention brand numbers, but ask for the one that excludes cabbage moths and flea beetles. They will know. That extra care at the start saves a season of regret. Mataniai. Number 2. The same veil that stops the moth also softens the wind. This is a gift I did not expect the first year. In this fast country, the spring winds can whip across the yard like an invisible broom, bending the young broccoli sideways, drying the top inch of soil before noon. The plants spend all their energy just holding on, their stems thickening too soon, and they do not grow upward into the sun. The mesh breaks the wind into 1,000 tiny breaths. The air moves, but gently, a quiet stirring, so the stems strengthen without breaking. I have seen a row of lettuce under a cover stand perfectly upright while the uncovered lettuce outside lean and twist from the gale. And if a late spring frost comes, I can throw a heavier row cover right over the same hoops, and my plants are snug in a pocket of still air that stays a few degrees warmer. I have saved many a tomato start that way, just by doubling the cloth. The structure works for every season. In high summer, when the sun wants to cook the soil, I can switch to a shade cloth on the same frame. This is not only a pest trick, this is a season tender. My wife calls it the garden's blanket. She said that to me one June morning when the mesclun was still sweet and cool under the cloth, the leaves as tender as a baby's ear, while the plants outside the covering were already bitter and bolting from the heat, sending up tall flower stalks in a panic. She was right. The covering mothers the plants. It holds them in a small, calm world. I think of my grandfather's village, where the old people would place straw mats over the tender shoots on cold mornings, and I see the same impulse of protection, the same hand of the gardener trying to soften the sky's moods. Number 3. There are some plants that need the bees to set fruit. Cucumbers, squash, melons, strawberries. For these, you keep the covering on while they are young, until the first flowers open. This is the dance. When the yellow blossoms appear, you must lift it or open the ends or remove it for a few hours each morning to let the pollinators in. I know this sounds like extra work. It is, but I tell myself Matanai to lose a whole crop to the cucumber beetle after 2 months of watering and feeding. That would be a true waste. The cucumber beetle is a cunning enemy. It arrives just when the plants look their strongest, and it brings disease on its mouthparts, a bacterial wilt that turns the leaves to wet paper overnight. I lost an entire patch of pickling cucumbers one year because I thought the plants were big enough to fend for themselves. The beetles came in a swarm, striped and spotted, and in 3 days the vines collapsed. I stood there, looking at the wilted mess, and I felt the old regret. So I spend the minutes now. In the cool of the morning, I go out with my coffee and I lift the cover off the hoops, folding it back carefully so it does not tear. The bees find the flowers within the hour. I watch them work, their legs dusted yellow, and I think, now the garden is a partnership again. By late morning, I cover the plants back up, before the beetles' favorite flight time. And if the beetles appear later, despite my efforts, I use another old barrier, a fine clay powder mixed with water, painted on the leaves. The clay coats the leaf with a pale white film and confuses the beetle's senses. It is not a poison, it is just dirt, a physical shield. My grandfather would have understood. The modern world sells this clay in bags with a brand name, but the earth provides it. I will not tell you the name. It is just a white rock dust that has been used for centuries. You can find it by asking at a good garden store for kaolin clay. The university papers tell you it works by gumming up the insect's antennae and making the plant unrecognizable. I just know my grandfather would have called it a second skin. Mix it with water and a tiny drop of soap to help it spread, and spray it on both sides of the leaves until they are ghostly. It washes off in rain, so you must reapply. But it is only clay, harmless to you and the bees. This is not a perfect fix, but together with the covering, it gives your squash and cucumbers a fighting chance without a drop of poison. Number 4. The covering also keeps out the larger thieves, the rabbit, the groundhog, the squirrel. I have a story about a squirrel. One autumn, I grew a small patch of peanuts for my grandson. He was 5 years old, and he had planted the seeds himself with a little trowel, his forehead furrowed in concentration. He came to visit every weekend to check the leaves. The day before harvest, I went out and found the soil turned, the shells scattered, not a peanut left. The ground looked like a tiny battlefield. A squirrel had been watching me all summer, learning my routine. I laughed, because what else can you do? But inside I felt the madanai, the effort, the water, the sun, the little boy's hope, all gone to a furry thief with a good memory. The next year I covered the peanut bed with netting from the start, and buried the edges deep, a full 6 inches underground so the squirrel could not tunnel. The squirrel sat on the fence and chattered at me, tail twitching, but he did not get in. I told my grandson, "We are smarter than one squirrel," he said, "but not smarter than 2, Grandpa." He is a sharp boy. Still, the netting held. So I say to you, do not wait until the bite marks appear. Cover the bed from the day you plant, and you will not need to wage war later. An extra caution for the 4-legged visitors. Some of them will try to chew through the mesh if they see the green inside. I have had a rabbit nibble a hole in a light row cover just to reach a lettuce head. If you have persistent rabbits, you might double the covering or use a stiffer mesh, like a hardware cloth bent into a tunnel, until the plants are large. But the principle is the same, a barrier that breathes but does not break. The peace of mind is worth the extra stone. Number 5. For larger plants that you cannot cover, like fruit trees, I use the clay spray I mentioned. I have a small cherry tree that I love. It is a compact variety, a dwarf lapins, and every June its branches hang heavy with dark sweet fruit. But the first years, the branches were not heavy. They were light, because the plum curculio would come and make its crescent-shaped scar on every fruit, a tiny egg inside, and the fruit would fall to the grass as hard green beads. I could not cover the whole tree. It was too tall, too wide, so I sprayed the developing fruit with the clay mixture 3 times, once after petal fall, then twice more, 10 days apart, as the old books say. I stood under the tree with a backpack sprayer, and I wet every little cherry until they looked like pale moons. The curculio tried to cut, and the clay stopped it. Physical, not poison. The fruit grew clean. When I picked the first cherry and bit into it, the juice running down my chin, I thought of my grandfather, who tended a persimmon tree for 60 years. He would have liked this clay. He would have said, "Hito no te wa kabe ni naru." A person's hand can become a wall. That is what we are doing. Building a wall of air and clay and mesh, not to fight, but to protect. The tree now gives us more cherries than we can eat, and my wife makes little jars of jam that she gives to the neighbors. That is the sweetness that comes when you stop the waste before it starts. Now I must be honest about a few more things, because I want you to succeed and not be caught unaware. The covering is not an absolute wall. A very small pest, like the spider mite, can sometimes find its way through the mesh if you do not choose the right size. I use a netting with holes small enough to stop even the flea beetle, and I check the underside of the leaves with a magnifying glass once a week, just in case. If mites appear, a hard spray of water from the hose can dislodge them, and the covering can go back on. Also, if you let the foliage press against the netting, some moths can lay eggs through the mesh onto the leaf. The leaf acts as a bridge, so I keep the hoops tall, at least 6 inches above the highest leaf, and I prune the inner branches that might push upward. In very hot climates, where the air is already thick and still, the covering can hold too much heat if you use a tight weave. Then you switch to a shade cloth or a netting with larger holes that still blocks the moths and butterflies, but lets more air through. And in very wet summers, the covering can keep moisture in, so you must watch for slugs. The slugs, of course, are already there in the soil waiting for darkness. A small ring of crushed eggshells or a shallow dish of beer can take care of them without lifting the cover. I say all this not to discourage you, but to give you the full picture. There is no perfect trick, but this one comes closer than any bottle on the shelf. It is a living method, not a dead chore. The modern world has a store for everything. For every pest, a spray. For every weed, a chemical. They sell you fear, and then sell you the cure. I say this gently, but I believe it is a kind of forgetting. The old wisdom is free. A piece of cloth, a set of hoops, some stones, and your own 2 hands. That is the shokunin spirit, the craftsman's care. Shokunin means one who puts their heart into the work, who treats the act of making or growing as a form of honor. The industry wants you to believe that you need their potions, that gardening is a battlefield with you as the general. But my grandfather taught me that a garden is a kitchen, a prayer, a home. You do not allow invaders into your home. You close the windows. The covering is just a window screen for your plants. That thought makes me smile. My wife and I keep a small garden still, not as large as my grandfather's fields, but enough for the 2 of us. Every spring I press the hoops into the soil, and I feel the same quiet ritual. The earth is cool and damp under my fingers. The mesh unrolls like a scroll, and I drape it and tuck it and stand back to see the garden become a protected place. There is no waste in a covered garden. Every leaf grows unchewed. Every carrot stays whole. The harvest is not a salvage operation where you cut away half the damage. It is abundance. The counter fills with clean produce. The refrigerator hums with green. And the taste of a perfect lettuce, grown without poison, is the taste of the old world, the taste of my grandfather's hands. Matanai, the regret of waste, has no place in a garden where the door is shut. Let me gather the threads so you can hold them all at once. The one trick is this. Keep the pests away with a physical barrier. Start when the plants are young. Use fine mesh over hoops. Secure the edges deeply. The same covering will temper the wind, hold off frost, and ease the summer sun. For fruiting crops, lift the veil when the bees are needed, and watch for beetles. If they come, use a clay barrier on the leaves, a simple white dust that confuses them without poison. For the biggest trees, use the same clay spray to protect the fruit. For the 4-legged thieves, bury the netting deep. This is not a trick of killing. It is a trick of keeping, and it works year after year, with no poison and very little cost. My garden is proof. The lettuce is clean, the bok choy unperforated, the strawberries whole, the cherries hanging like dark rubies under the clayed leaves. I sleep soundly, and in the morning I go out and the plants are as I left them, only larger. So tell me, in the comments below, have you tried using a covering? What pests trouble your garden? I read every one. I want to hear from the young gardener with a balcony pot and the old gardener with a field. We are all learning together. And if you have a memory of a grandparent who taught you something wise about the soil, I would be honored to read it. Remember this. A garden is a promise to your own table. When you shield it, You honor the seed that cracked the dark soil, the rain that fell, the sun that pulled the leaf upward. Waste nothing. Let nothing take what you have tended. Matanai, live gently, and your garden will live fully.